Welcome to another insightful episode of Whispers of the Womb. Today I'm thrilled to introduce our special guest, Louise Kershaw from the UK, a seasoned career coach dedicated supporting women in navigating the intricate landscape of their professional journey. With a background in talent management and a solid foundation in psychology, Louise brings a unique perspective to career development. In this episode, we delve into a topic that affects many individuals in the workforce: imposter syndrome. Louise provides a clear and concise definition, unraveling the layers of this sensation, where individuals doubt the deserving nature of their achievements, feeling like they've achieved success by luck and fearing exposure as a fraud. So without further ado, let's embark on this insightful journey with Louise Kershaw, here to guide you through this enriching conversation. So welcome to Whispers of the Womb, and today we are joined by the wonderful Louise Kershaw. So I'm going to hand you over to Louise now to introduce herself and explain a little bit about what she does and why she's here today. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's great to be here. So I am a career coach, and I specifically support women to get unstuck and really get in tune with what they want from their careers so that they can pivot into something that aligns more closely to who they are. I also help them navigate obstacles in their career, deal with burnout, and support people facing other transitions like redundancy. So my background's in HR and talent management, and that's been really valuable to inform my perspective on career development. And my academic background is also in psychology, so I love bringing a psychological perspective to my coaching practice as well.
That's wonderful to hear. So thanks for sharing that. And we do have quite similar backgrounds in our sort of career, from HR to talent, and I love that. Um, so today we're here to specifically look at imposter syndrome. So for the listeners, could you just explain a little bit what imposter syndrome is and how that may affect women in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's start with just a simple definition, right, of what imposter syndrome is. And so this is the sensation, the feeling that you do not feel that your achievements are deserved. You feel like you got them by luck, that you're a bit of a fraud, and that really at any moment you're going to be found out. So essentially, it's that huge gap between how you think you're doing and how you think you're supposed to be doing, or how you think others think that you're doing. So there's a disconnect there, there's a dissonance. And you also feel like it's only you, that everyone else is competent, only you are pretending, only you are winging it. And you really can't internalize your achievements and believe in yourself. So you might also equate your personal sense of worth and your belief that you're a good person with that external validation and achievements. So it's really quite, pernicious and dangerous. And it does affect, I'd say, everyone. But specifically here, what would be great to talk about is, how this can show up for women at work, and also how it can sometimes be exacerbated by the onset of things like perimenopause and menopause, and what we can do about that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I know I've suffered myself with this, so I kind of get it. And from my perspective, this imposter syndrome can really, really affect the body, the obviously the mind, because that's where it's coming from, but brain health, that that fog in the brain, and then that manifests into sort of bellyache because your gut is really taking its toll, and then backache because, and it's all just, and then your whole body starts to really just start to crumble really under that imposter feeling.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. What might be valuable is to talk about, cause and where it comes from, and then some of those symptoms, those very real symptoms that you described, can be debilitating. So if we just touch on the neuroscience for a minute, but stay with me. I promise it's not super sciencey. So essentially what happens is our brains are trying to keep us safe, right? Our brains are prediction machines, and they're just constantly scanning the environment for threat. And it therefore hates uncertainty, and it doesn't want us to try anything new, anything potentially scary, anything where it doesn't really know what the outcome's going to be. But because our brains are also super lazy, we don't want to waste lots of cognitive effort and energy analyzing the details of every possible event that we go into. So instead, we'll just do a quick scan and say, I don't know what this is, looks like it could be a threat, don't do it, alert, danger. And so it's using that kind of shortcut to fill us with that sensation that this isn't something we can do. And at the same time, we're social pack animals. So in terms of our evolutionary psychology, being thrown out of the pack was a real life or death event to grapple with. So we're still really highly attuned to the risk that someone might be criticizing us, someone might be judging us or thinking of us badly, or we might be excluded from something because of how we act. So we're really sensitive to our position in the kind of social hierarchy. So it's really no surprise that we feel this way. And everybody does to some degree, unless I suppose you have like a clinical level of narcissism. But just because it's common and it's pervasive and it's very explainable, that doesn't mean that it's not harmful. So Suzanne, you touched on, the ways that that can show up, and it can really lead to things like anxiety, burnout, depression, procrastination, because procrastination isn't laziness, it's a fear-based response. It's when you don't really know how something's going to turn out, so you just avoid doing it entirely. But also things like shame, physical sensations like headaches and stomach aches, and that hypervigilance, because our brain also doesn't want to be wrong. So we're scanning the environment for a signal that we were correct and we were right to be worried. So it's really quite, it can be quite dangerous.
I know for me, so for the listeners who haven't been following my podcast and maybe they're just tuning into this episode, I had an oophorectomy, which is the removal of the ovaries and the fallopian tubes due to a potential cancer scare. And that was during COVID lockdown. And sadly, I then contracted sepsis and then necrotizing fasciitis. And then I went into liver failure, and then I went into radical menopause. So there was all of this going on. And for me, that whole, it took me a long time to get better. But then when I did go back to work, and I was still under the hospital, and I was still going back, and I was still, seeing clinical experts. But because of my background in yoga and in holistic wellness, I chose to really delve into how can nutrition help? How can mindfulness help? How can meditation help? There has to be a way through this. And it was extremely debilitating because I was dealing with all of those different things that had happened with my body and my brain. So it was kind of a little bit of PTSD coming in there, and then all that physical aspect. But one of the things that manifested for me was this terrible physical attribute, which was I was suffering from terrible diarrhea and constant urination, like so bad, like literally terrible. And I was backwards and forwards to the hospital, backwards and forwards back into hospital for more tests, for more procedures, and they couldn't find anything clinically wrong with me. And then the doctor said, think it's depression. And I could not believe that depression could actually come out in a human in that way. And once I'd kind of been given that kind of idea of, all right, well, this is what I'm dealing with, slowly that stopped. But there was that kind of that imposter syndrome coming in of I'm not good enough. I need to leave the job that I'm in because I can't do it properly anymore. And that would manifest, and it would manifest, and it would manifest. And to a degree, some of it I couldn't do anymore because of the foggy brain, and the, you know, the menopause really took a toll on me until I was finally given HRT. But HRT wasn't just the be all and end all. You know, there was a lot going on in the background in terms of nutrition, like I've just said, all the mindfulness, meditation. And for me, I had to have a solid routine. The alarm went off, I was up, shower, dressed, out the house with the dogs, would have to, you know, have all my meals planned in advance so that I didn't waver. So there was bringing all of that into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And it is, you know, can really be a horrific journey. And it's like you say, as soon as you start to put in place mechanisms to deal with it, it starts to alleviate some of those symptoms and you feel a bit more in control. And that's exactly what you can do around imposter syndrome as well. And we can learn from things like cognitive behavioral therapy to learn how to deal with and overcome and ultimately reframe imposter syndrome. So I think one is recognizing the lie. So your brain is lying to you. You know, let's say you're at work and you have to go into a meeting and deliver a big presentation. The scared sort of survivor part of your brain, the amygdala, is being activated and you're going into fight or flight. And that's when you get tunnel vision. It's really hard to think rationally about really anything. So you need to switch on that thinking part of your brain. You know, that prefrontal cortex that's able to deal with like rationality and decision making. And so you can do this by kind of coming back to yourself and centering yourself. So rooting yourself in a physicality can be really powerful. So things like, you know, name 3 things that you can see or smell or touch or taste, like really get in touch with your senses. You can rub your fingers together to bring you back into yourself and into your body. And ideally start to write down what you're feeling. And that's when you really can start to process and recognize what it is that's happening rather than be a victim to it. And at that point, it's having a dialogue with your brain, right? So creating a big gap between you and your brain. So often people think that they are their thoughts, but you're shifting it from I won't do well as a thought to, oh, I'm having the thought that I won't do well.
Mhm.
Okay, because you are not your brain. And you treat the thoughts that it offers you with curiosity, but not taking them for fact. So your brain is really a separate entity. And to be honest, it's a bit of a dick. You know, its job is to keep you safe. To that extent, it's like your friend. It's trying to treat you, you know, safely, but it's going about it in quite a harmful way. So Mo Gaudat talks about naming your brain. His brain is called Becky. My brain is called Steve for reasons beyond understanding. And so when, you know, Steve is offering me these useless thoughts, I just say, oh, Steve, that's not helpful at all, is it?
Oh, I love
Can I
that.
have, yeah, can I have a helpful thought, please, that's actually going to serve me? So I see Steve as like this panicked, scared, you know, safety obsessed, risk averse, kind of fretting entity, but it's not me. And that's the thing that's giving me these thoughts. And it can also help to say it in a stupid voice. So when
Mhm.
Steve says to me, "You're going to mess up this presentation," you can say, "You're going to mess up this presentation." You know, like you're undermining the thoughts that your brain offers you by taking its power away and weakening it and showing it that it's quite silly, and then
Mhm.
asking it for a thought that's actually helpful is a powerful way. So I think that's like the first step, is just to recognize where these things come from and that your feelings as well are not facts. This is data. It's not a directive. You don't have to believe that you're an imposter because you feel like one. So when you believe that your emotions are real and true, that's called emotional reasoning, and that's one of the most dangerous of the cognitive distortions. And we do it all day, every day. You know, I think we have something like 90,000 thoughts a day, and like 80% of them are negative thoughts, not based on fact, i.e.,
Wow.
distortions. So this is normal. This is just part of being human, but recognizing what's happening from the kind of the brain perspective, the neuroscience, is helpful to take its power away, I
Mhm.
think.
Mhm. I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm going to have to think of a name now for my brain. Like, and you mentioned there
Yeah.
about touching the fingers. I like that because I actually, I'm a trained reflexologist, and a lot of the time
Mm.
when I would have to go to a meeting and I would become nervous and doing exactly what you've just explained, I would do hand reflexology, and the thumb relates to our brain, and I would be sitting sort of moving my fingers across my thumb and pinching the
Mhm.
thumb and just sort of trying to calm myself down a bit. Like, you've got this kind of repetition. Um, and you mentioned there about writing things down as well. One of the things that I found really, really uplifting was journaling, but not writing down the negative, writing down the positive side of, how I was feeling. Yes, it may have been perceived as being a negative thought, but if I write it down in a positive way, it felt better to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And even writing down what the distortion is, right? And naming it. So you might write down the thought, which is, I'm going to ruin this presentation. Name the distortion that links to. So you're doing fortune telling. You might be calling yourself bad names. You might be labeling yourself. You can actually name what the distortion is. And then in the third column, you can write down a more realistic thought that's based in fact,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I've never ruined a presentation before. I've prepared really well. If this goes badly, it's fixable. And so these are all just facts. And so that's much more grounding.
Yeah.
And in that way, you're using the thinking part of your brain. And I really like to draw on, what Viktor Frankl talks about in his book. So this is somebody who survived Auschwitz, where, of course, his actual fate and his daily reality was completely out of his hands. Right? He had no actual choice in terms of his surroundings and even his future. But he realized that what the guards couldn't take away from him was the way he felt and what he chose to think about and the way he chose to react to things. So it's about that secondary control. You might not have primary control over the situation, but you have secondary control, which is how you respond. And what he talks about is the space between the stimulus and the response. And if you can create that space, it's in that space that the choice lies. You have all the choice you need in that space to react in the way that you choose. So of course it's easier said than done, but by understanding the mechanisms of what's happening and how your brain is working and why it's giving you these nonsense thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
you can create that space and then choose to react in the way that's powerful and serves you.
Mm. I like that. And that's taken me back to actually when I was in hospital, and that, that inability, like you're saying, you haven't got the choice, you're there, these people are telling you what to do. I couldn't get out of bed, so I was relying on other people to do things for me. But there was things like, I'm quite sensitive to light, and they wouldn't turn the lights off in the ward. So I asked my partner to leave a cap at the door because he couldn't come in because it was COVID. And so I would just sit all day with a cap on in the hospital bed. But that helped because then I was in control of how that environment made me feel. And everyone laughed and everyone thought it was a bit silly, but I wasn't bothered because it made me feel better in how I was reacting to the situation that I was in.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it's taking control of it and realizing that you still have power
Mm.
to redirect how you're feeling about a situation. Um, and I suppose there's two more steps you can take with imposter syndrome. So that was the first one around clarity, I think, and understanding what's going on and how you can create that space to challenge your brain. But the second step is to counter it with the truth. So, looking for evidence that you actually are doing a good job and even keeping an accomplishments tracker. Because remember, the definition of this is you you don't internalize your accomplishments. You don't believe that that's because you did something well. You think it was just down to luck. And so this is about generating that sense of the evidence for your great achievements. So you know, you really need to become your own biggest fan. You know, this is about self-compassion and being kind to yourself and treating yourself the way that you would a best friend. And so, you know, not comparing yourself to others. If you're going to make a comparison, it would just be to an earlier version of yourself, but not to other people.
Mhm.
And to recognize that no one's looking at you, no one's judging you, no one's criticizing you. People are thinking about themselves. Like, people are self-obsessed, and we often worry so much what other people are going to think. But chances are they're not thinking about you at all in the nicest possible way. Don't let that kind of get in your way, because they're thinking about themselves, not about you. And then I think the third and most powerful one for me is to reframe the whole thing. So, reframing imposter syndrome as not even necessarily something to avoid, but a signal that you're about to learn something. So, you know that your brain gives you that surge of insecurity because it wants to stop you from trying something new.
Mhm.
That's where the learning is, that's where the good stuff is. So, I think the time in my life when I suddenly realized I didn't feel imposter syndrome was when I was in a job that I'd just been in for slightly too long. I was the most experienced person on the team. Um, and when you feel actually a little bit bored, that's when you
Yep.
think, oh, I'm not learning anymore. That's
Mm.
why I don't feel imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
So when you lose that insecurity and you suddenly feel like, oh, I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm the most experienced, but that's super boring, right? You're no longer going to learn anything.
Mhm.
So instead, seek out that imposter syndrome, like elbow your way into spaces where you don't feel like you deserve to be. And when you get that signal of imposter syndrome, that's the sign that you're in the right place, because that's where the learning is.
I love that. That's really good. So just remind me, what are those three stages again? You've got the first one is identifying it. Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, like understanding, getting clarity, I suppose, would be the header for the first one. So it's
Mhm.
understanding the way that your brain is working, the fact that it's giving you these things that are not true, that
Mhm.
you don't have to believe them. You can switch out of the fight or flight response and turn on your thinking part of your brain, bringing yourself back into your physicality, rubbing your fingers together, noticing your senses, writing down how you're feeling. So switching on, you know, your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
And then the second one is countering the lie with the truth. So
Yeah.
looking for evidence of that you're doing a good job, keeping a brag box or an accomplishments tracker, and
Mhm.
treating yourself kindly in that way. And the third one is reframing it, you know, seeking it out as a signal that actually you're about to learn a ton. And when you don't have imposter syndrome, then what are you even doing? Because that means you're not learning anything, and you're probably super comfortable, and you're not even outside of your comfort zone at all. So that's the kind of the helpful three ways
Mm.
to overcome it. But I think it's also recognizing that all of that's happening on a good day, right? All of that imposter syndrome struggle that we go through, that's on a good day. And then perimenopause comes along, or menopause comes along. And that's when it's a struggle, because everything can feel 10 times worse right now, right? Because
Yeah.
suddenly you've got maybe a disorder to your mood or your hormones, you know, sleep disturbance, physical pain, brain fog, you're struggling with your mindset. And perhaps you're even self-conscious about the physical symptoms, just starting to feel like maybe people are noticing this or looking at you funny, and you get even more wrapped up in the perceptions that other people have and what they're thinking about you. So it's this interplay between what was already happening for everyone, and then specifically how this can get worse for women when you get the onset of this kind of critical time of change that can make things a little bit worse.
Mhm. Yeah. I know for me it was like, it sounds really egotistical, but it was things like my skin was so dry, so I didn't want to wear makeup because it felt awful. I felt like I had this like mask on my face. My hair was awful, no matter what I tried to do. It was just always lank and
Mm.
awful, and then just like you say, that this low mood and that like just feeling like a bit of an outsider, not really feeling like part of a tribe.
Yeah. And it's, I think, exacerbated further because on
Yep.
top of all of those things that you just
You just
described,
you just froze there, Louise. So if we can just you go back to what you were gonna just say. Okay.
So I think, on top of all of that, it gets exacerbated further by, what's called corporate gaslighting. And so some companies might be slowly coming around to like making accommodations for menopause and acknowledging it. But I think largely, as with, in my opinion, all situations where there's a health issue that affects only women, I feel like corporations have ignored this. And so, for the most part, a lot of places of work still don't acknowledge it or make accommodations for it or even openly address it. So, like with the imposter syndrome, you feel like, oh, it must just be me then. Because if this was something that other women were struggling with, we would be doing something about it, right? So, therefore, it must just be only me who feels this way.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's not you at all. It's just that women's health isn't taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's realizing that you're being a little bit potentially gaslit by, your place of work. And therefore, I think what we can talk about a bit now as well is what you can do about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be lovely. Yeah, if you could just talk us through that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the stats on this are huge. So, like right now, there's maybe 13 million women in the UK who are likely to be in perimenopause or menopause. And it's a really significant time for them at work. So, CIPD, the professional body that look after HR, CIPD research shows that 2/3 of people who've experienced menopausal symptoms, they believe that their symptoms have a really negative impact of them at work, and many of them are likely to actually quit. Okay, so over half of people surveyed said they would be unable to go into work because of their menopause symptoms. Um, and a lot of them, I think 18% felt like they wouldn't be able to even tell their manager for the real reason of their absence. So there's still a lot of shame about this and a lot of discomfort that sits around it, which is not helped at all by, yes, the underpinning imposter syndrome that exists in all of us, but then the corporate gaslighting on top of it, failing to kind of acknowledge these situations. So it's not to say that it's on your shoulders and it's your responsibility to fix that societal shame that a lot of women still feel. Of course, this is a really huge issue. But I would say there are maybe 4 steps that you can take in the workplace to navigate this well and hopefully get better outcomes for yourself and for others if you can. So the first is don't plow on regardless. Okay, so this is a really serious change and it can have serious implications. So it's listening to your body and putting yourself first. So not feeling like everything has to be the same as it was before this happened. So this is a real and critical time in your life. Things won't be the same. Okay, so not plowing on regardless is the first step. And I think the second step is advocating for yourself. This is probably the most important. And this is about getting really clear on what you need. So for some, that might be a physical adjustment. For some, it might be working from home more, a different environment, less travel. Like, what would help you? What are you asking for? It may be a change of approach. So asking for, when your manager has told you to do something, could they also please put it in an email because you're struggling with brain fog or you're struggling with anxiety? So if they have positive feedback to share with you, could they share that please and don't keep it to themselves? Like get really clear on what it is that would help you the most and then advocate for that with your manager. So it's setting up a specific meeting to have with your manager about this. It's not tagging it onto the end of an existing call or meeting. It's finding a space that's quiet. You're not going to be in the canteen with people walking past you. You're not going to be distracted. Set up a dedicated meeting. Tell them that you'd like to talk about your well-being. And if you feel comfortable, advocate for yourself in this way by asking for what you need.
That's some amazing advice. I'm sure the listeners are going to really tap into that for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess the final 2, so I think there's 4 steps. So it's not plowing on,
Yep.
advocating for yourself.
Yep.
The third would be, if you're able to, asking for greater services in your place of work. So that might be well-being coaches, workshops, specific training. So, my background's in HR, and often there might be an employee resource group that does do training on this, or has groups where women can come together to share their experiences, but they might not. So ask what does exist. If nothing does exist, start to ask for it. Like, put it in the verbatim feedback of your engagement survey. Tell your manager, tell your HR, like, shout about what it is that you think would be helpful for yourself and others.
Mhm.
And I suppose the final one is compassion again. So it's that self-compassion and being your own friend. And it's to realize that you're not doing anything wrong. You're not failing in any way by going through this change. And just because it's a normal thing to go through doesn't mean that it's okay and we just accept that this is how hard it is for women. I think there's a huge bit of advocacy and social change that I'm seeing it begin to pick up speed. I'm seeing the conversations happening more and more, but I still think there's much more to be done on this front.
Mhm.
And so just reminding yourself, you're not doing anything wrong, you're not failing. This is a really difficult time. And I think we've been gaslit into thinking that it's just something we should put up and shut up about. And that doesn't have to be the case.
And also in a corporate world, if we looked at corporate, structures, there's a lot more women at work now in senior roles, and
Mm.
women of a certain age would be in those senior roles because that's just life. That's just how it happens as we progress through. So, I'm talking about like CEOs, chief people officers, HMOs, all, all these different titles. Now, I wasn't at that height in my corporate world, but I can't imagine what that must be like for someone who is at that level and who, you know, needs that support and needs that help, because that must be quite debilitating if you are responsible for a whole structure in your organization and a lot of, you've got a lot of employees underneath you to manage.
Oh, it must be incredibly hard and really multi-layered and complex in those
Mhm.
situations, because you're dealing with you've probably had a lot of maybe sexism that you've tried to combat your whole career. Maybe you've broken the glass ceiling and you're the only female exec on the team. You're trying to combat the perceptions and expectations of others, whether real or perceived. You don't want to fall into the trap of doing the sorts of things, or having to have the sorts of adjustments that you believe men are going to accuse you of needing, and needing special treatment. Like, there's all sorts of social traps you're trying to avoid falling into, and stereotypical traps you're trying to avoid. And then on top of that, you've got the very real physical sensations you're grappling with, the mental repercussions of it, which are only just beginning to be spoken about.
Yeah. Mhm.
And you're managing people, so you've got like real responsibilities.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's a very multi-layered and complex situation. So it's recognizing that that's not a normal thing to have to deal with, giving
Mhm.
yourself that compassion.
Well, thank you, Louise, for sharing all of this really useful information. It's been a lovely conversation about how to sort of navigate, and also just a reminder to all the women out there who are listening, it is about you. It is, you do need to be looking after yourself, and it's not, you don't need to feel guilty about that. This is about your life, and you might have another 40 years, 50 years on the planet yet, so we want to make them joyful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not to say that it's difficult, because I think societally we do make a big deal of women having children, and it's a big thing that we celebrate, and it's something that isn't hidden or shied away from. And pregnancies are, a cause for congratulations, and at work even it's celebrated, and people wish you well going on your mat leave and things like that. But as soon as you're past that point, it's as though the remaining health issues that women are going to face, and significant events of their life, are just sort of swept under the rug, because this is no longer helpful to society that you're going through this thing. And so it's not to say that, it's on your shoulders, it's on women's shoulders to fix this, but I think we are at a tipping point of changing that dialogue and that national conversation around menopause.
Mhm.
And so it's realizing that this hasn't been the case in the past. In the past, it's been, it's silence and shame. And hopefully we're getting to a point where it is more widely spoken about and adjustments are going to be made to
Yeah,
accommodate it.
absolutely. Yeah. So I'd love for you to share now with the listeners what you offer, where we can find you, what sort of packages do you to give out to people, and what sort of things have you been working on currently?
Yeah, thank you. So, in terms of my kind of standard career coaching, I offer a package of career clarity coaching, and that's 2 sessions for £350. I also offer a more lengthy deep dive into career pivots. So, this is my career pivot success program, and we do 10 sessions over 3 or 4 months. We get really deep into who you are and what you want and what kind of job would light you up. We leverage really great psychometrics in that, and that's £2,000. And then I also offer a career redundancy kind of workshop, so a 3-hour workshop. If you have recently been made redundant or you know someone who has, it's career renaissance. It's a redundancy recovery session to really get clear on how you're feeling about this, what your future might look like, spruce up your CV, and help you kind of rebound with more energy and momentum than you had before, so you can arise stronger. So it's really helping people through transitions and overcoming any mindset obstacles they might have.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, work is life, isn't it? And we want to be happy when we're at work, and those packages seem really good in terms of, I've been made redundant myself, and it's an awful feeling, and you feel like, where am I going to go? Like, because I think what you kind of end up doing is just going into the same job again, and actually,
Mm.
having some sessions with you might be that really good point in your career, whatever you're doing, to actually go, well, actually, what do I want to do? Rather than just going down that same path again and going back into the same momentum when actually you might not have really have been that happy anyway.
Absolutely. And redundancy, of course, it can be a stressful time. Of course, there's a cost of living crisis and you have bills to pay. So that stress is real. But I really feel that it can be a gift if you are able to give yourself that time to lean into the pause that it's offering you and reveal where are you actually at in your career and where do you want to go next? And it can offer you that space to do that reflective thinking. So it can be, a real moment of change for people.
Mhm. And so I know you're on LinkedIn, and I follow you on LinkedIn, and I also follow you on Instagram. And for anyone that's listening, I urge you to follow Louise on Instagram because her reels are really, really profound and really, really good. So you need to follow her on there. So for anyone that is listening, all of Louise's links will be in the showcase notes. So if there's anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners, it's just as a wrap up, Louise, what would it be?
Oh, thank you so much, Suzanne. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And yes, you can find me. My company's called Clarity Coaching with Louise. So that's that's where you'll find me on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. Actually, no, that's not true. On LinkedIn, it's just my personal. It's Louise Kershaw. But on Instagram, it's Clarity Coaching with Louise. And yeah, I really hope that conversation can help someone today.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for joining us, Louise. We really, really appreciate you taking the time out.
Thanks so much for having me.
As we wrap up this enlightening episode of Whispers of the Womb with the incredible Louise Kershaw, I want to express my gratitude for her invaluable insights into imposter syndrome and its impact on women in the workplace. Her expertise in career coaching, coupled with the psychological perspective, has brought depth to our understanding. The exploration of imposter syndrome, its roots and the intersections with women's experiences at work, especially during life transitions, has been truly eye-opening. Remember, recognising and addressing imposter syndrome is a crucial step towards reclaiming your achievements and embracing your true worth. If you are struggling in the workplace with how to communicate, any hormonal imbalances such as perimenopause or menopause, share any gynecological pain that you face each month, I am here as your wellness coach for women of all ages. drop me a DM, take advantage of your free 20-minute consultation. I'll help you navigate those tricky conversations with your boss. Thank you, listeners. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on Whispers of the Womb. Until next time, take care, embrace your authenticity, and thrive in every aspect of your life.